One morning, the sun freezes, not dimmed, not destroyed, but crystallized into ice, so cold it burns. The light stops, shadows solidify. And in that silent instant, we learn what holds the universe together, and what happens when warmth dies. At first, no one noticed. The dawn came, as it always did, but without warmth. The shadows stretched longer than they should have, and the birds didn't sing. Somewhere over the Atacama Desert, an astronomer looked up from her monitor, expecting the usual turbulence of solar flares. Instead, she saw stillness, the kind of silence that belongs to space itself. The sun had stopped burning. Its golden fire was gone, replaced by a sphere of flawless white. Not dimmed, not dead, frozen. Through the lenses of the Solar Dynamics Observatory, its surface shimmered like crystal. No convection cells, no coronal arcs, no radiation storms. Just perfection, cold and absolute. At that moment, the world lost its breath. In Hawaii, the Daniel K. Inouye Solar Telescope confirmed the same image. In orbit, the Parker Solar Probe sent data that made no sense. The sun's corona had vanished. Its magnetic field collapsed into symmetry. In one impossible heartbeat, a furnace that had burned for 4.6 billion years turned to ice. The feeds filled with panic. Governments called emergency councils. Children asked why sunlight didn't feel warm anymore, and yet light still reached the earth, the final photons from a sun that no longer existed as fire. For 8 minutes and 20 seconds, humanity watched the ghost of its past illuminate the sky. Then, one by one, sensors across the planet began to register a drop. A slow, unstoppable fall toward the absolute zero of disbelief. Physicists scrambled for answers. Nuclear fusion, the process that powers stars, is not a flame, but a balance. In the sun's heart, 600 million tons of hydrogen fuse into helium every second, releasing energy that pushes against gravity's eternal pull. If that balance breaks, the sun collapses or explodes. But freezing, that was never in the equations. Dr. Maria Keller at CERN described it best. It's like watching fire obey the laws of ice. Helioseismologists replayed the data. The vibrations that once pulsed through the solar body had gone silent. No acoustic waves, no turbulence. Even the neutrino detectors, deep beneath the mountains of Japan and Canada, recorded nothing. The streams of ghost particles that constantly pass through every living thing had stopped. In that silence, humanity discovered the weight of dependence, not just on warmth, but on the promise that the universe behaves. News anchors wept openly. Pilots saw frost forming at 30,000 feet. In Stockholm, a historian whispered that maybe, for the first time, the mythologies were right. The gods had withdrawn their fire, but the scientists knew better. They knew what should have happened. Without the counterforce of fusion, the sun's gravity should have crushed it in minutes. Yet it did not. Its mass remained stable. Its light, though dimmer, held steady, refracted through frozen layers of impossible material. NASA released the first high-resolution image. The world gasped. It looked beautiful. A flawless white orb, faceted like ice, reflecting its own imprisoned brilliance. It was not ash, not ruin, but order. The ESA's solar orbiter captured spectra that defied classification. No trace of plasma, no radiation signatures, only a faint photonic shimmer, as though every wavelength of light had been locked in place. Some theorized that the sun had entered a new phase of matter, one unknown to science. a kind of stellar, solid forged at quantum extremes. Parker's instruments detected something. Stranger still, temperatures dropping not just in proximity, but in concept. It was as if heat itself had ceased to exist, replaced by an energy field with negative entropy. In simpler words, cold that should not be possible. Around the world, physicists argued in real time. Some blamed dark energy interference. Others whispered about quantum decoherence on a cosmic scale. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. The sun had stopped burning, and nothing in physics could explain why. People filled the streets at night, looking up at the crystalline orb that had replaced their star. It glowed softly, almost kindly, like a lantern in morning. But no warmth reached them. The winds slowed. The clouds thickened. The oceans began to mist over with ice. In ancient myths, the sun was eternal, the unblinking eye of gods, the chariot of creation, the heartbeat of all things. In laboratories, it was hydrogen and helium, pressure and plasma. But in that moment, it was neither. It was an absence made visible, a perfect silence where chaos once sang. Every culture had once feared a night without dawn. None had imagined a dawn without heat. Satellites tried to peer deeper into the frozen sphere, but their sensors were blinded, not by brightness, but by structure. The sun's new surface refracted light infinitely, scattering it into recursive spirals that returned no readable data. It was as if the star had sealed itself in a prison of symmetry. In Geneva, physicists debated whether this was even matter anymore. Some speculated the sun's interior might have crossed a phase boundary in the quantum vacuum, collapsing its energy field into an informational crystal. Others feared something worse, that this transformation wasn't isolated, that the freezing might spread. And then came the first confirmation from Voyager 2, 6 light-hours away. Solar wind, 0. Interplanetary magnetic field, collapsed. The breath of the sun had stopped. It was official. The heartbeat of the solar system was gone. On Earth, temperatures began to plummet by degrees per hour. Power grids strained. Cities flickered. And yet, through the fear, scientists continued to stare, hypnotized by beauty that defied reason for millennia. Humanity had looked at the sun and seen its godlike constancy. Now, for the first time, it saw its fragility. A star can live for billions of years, but it can also stop in a second. And when it does, everything that ever depended on its fire, every breath, every memory, every dream of warmth becomes a question. The day the sun froze, the universe reminded its children of a truth they had always known but never faced. Fire is borrowed, and one day it must be returned. The first night after the sun froze, the world did not sleep. Every observatory, from Geneva to Pasadena, pulsed with the flicker of screens and the low hum of failing models. Supercomputers, machines built to simulate black holes, fusion, and the birth of galaxies, were fed the new data. Every run ended the same way: collapse, implosion, catastrophe. Not a single program, not a single equation could produce a sun that should exist. And yet, it did. Physicists stared at the impossible. By all thermodynamic law, the sun should have fallen inward under its own gravity the moment fusion ceased. The balance between radiation pressure and gravitational compression would have snapped like a cosmic string. But the frozen star held its shape perfectly still, perfectly symmetrical. It was as if nature itself had paused mid-equation at the Max Planck Institute. Dr. Reinhardt whispered what others were too afraid to say. The universe has stopped making sense. Laboratories across the planet lit up with emergency collaboration channels. NASA, ESA, CERN feeding the same datasets into their simulators. The results bordered on mockery. A sphere of hydrogen ice could not survive its own weight. The density should crush every molecule into degeneracy. Temperatures should rise to billions of degrees, reigniting fusion. Instead, sensors reported temperatures lower than anything ever recorded, below absolute zero in effective thermodynamic distribution. A phrase emerged: the impossible matter hypothesis. If the sun had become pure ice, it was not water, nor solid hydrogen, nor any crystalline form of known matter. It was something else, a negative temperature state, where the usual hierarchy of energy had inverted. Particles no longer obeyed the flow from hot to cold. Instead, the sun had become a system where coldness itself radiated outward, a paradoxical furnace of anti-heat. In one theoretical sense, negative temperature isn't colder, it's beyond cold, a condition where entropy folds back on itself. Atoms no longer climb toward chaos, but toward perfect alignment, and in that alignment, all randomness dies. Amina Farouk, a quantum physicist in Cairo, compared it to a Bose-Einstein condensate ocean of particles so unified they behave as one. If the sun is in that state, she said, then it isn't matter anymore. It's coherence. It's one thing pretending to be many, but coherence at stellar scales breaks everything. Gravity, thermodynamics, relativity, even Einstein's field equations, those pristine laws binding spacetime to mass, refuse to compute. Eddington's radiative equilibrium, broken Beatty's nuclear reaction models, obsolete. Every cornerstone of astrophysics cracked like glass under this weight of contradiction. At the European Southern Observatory, telescopes captured strange diffraction patterns around the frozen sunlight, bending not as a function of mass, but structure, as if its surface was no longer emitting photons, but trapping them in a lattice, each photon echoing endlessly inside the frozen shell. The sun had become a mirror, reflecting the last 8 minutes of its former self into infinity. Neutrino observatories confirmed the worst. For decades, a ghostly rain of neutrinos had poured from the sun's heart, passing through planets, flesh, and stone alike. But now, the detectors fell silent. In the caverns of Super Kamiokande, the data streams flattened into nothing, no trace of nuclear burning, no sign of decay. The cosmos had lost one of its most fundamental voices. 8 minutes after the last fusion event, the final photons reached Earth. They fell like embers from a dying fire, illuminating a world that still believed in morning. Then the spectrum changed. Light remained, but its warmth was gone. It was the glow of memory, not existence. In Geneva, a theoretical roundtable convened by candlelight, the city already darkened by rolling power failures. They revisited the holy equations of physics, the same ones that had predicted everything from starlight to time dilation. And one by one, those equations collapsed under this new evidence. The sun's temperature gradient defied statistical mechanics. Its surface defied quantum even relativity, Einstein's great unifier, not account for a star frozen in perfect equilibrium. Stephen Hawking had once speculated about phase transitions in space, when the vacuum itself might shift from one configuration to another, changing the very constants of reality. Could this be one? Had the sun become the first witness to a cosmic metamorphosis, matter crossing into a new phase of existence? The idea spread quietly, like a virus in the scientific mind. If true, it meant the fabric of reality was not fixed. The universe could rewrite its own laws, and if it could do that once, it could do it again. Observatories began reporting faint distortions around the frozen sun, as if space-time itself were refracting. Radio waves bent unpredictably. Light curves wavered. The orbits of Mercury and Venus deviated by fractions of degrees. No gravitational collapse, no explosion, just a slow, steady warping of the solar fabric. Reality was stretching, but not tearing. Not yet. Meanwhile, the sun's spectrum, once rich in hydrogen alpha lines, flattened into a single, unclassifiable emission peak. No color, no heat, just light, frozen in a crystalline pattern that repeated across every wavelength. To human eyes, it appeared as blinding purity. To instruments, it was the sound of physics itself. Stopping. Across the world, scientists began to whisper the same sentence for the first time. The universe has disobeyed itself. It was no longer just a star. It was a message written in contradiction. Some believed the answer lay in quantum information. The idea that the universe is built from bits of reality that can shift their meaning. If so, perhaps the sun's freeze was a form of encryption, the cosmos hiding its code behind impossible conditions. Others argued that this was entropy in reverse, the end state of the universe arriving early, focused through one dying star. But beyond speculation, one truth held. The laws humanity trusted had become optional. CERN ran high-energy collisions in desperation, searching for any sign of the same transformation in miniature. None appeared. It was as if the event that froze the sun existed beyond reproducibility, an act of physics that could happen only once. An exception written into the structure of everything. For months, scientists worked under the pale glare of their inert star. Equations sprawled across whiteboards, collapsing into paradox. Every failure deepened the dread. If the sun could betray its own mechanics, what else could? What holds time in place? What guarantees the orbit of planets? And as they stared through telescopes at the crystalline sphere, something began to change in the way they looked at it. The fear gave way to reverence. The ice wasn't chaos. It was precision, impossible perfection. Perhaps, some whispered, this wasn't the death of physics, but its evolution, still. That thought did little to ease the cold that crept into every corner of human understanding. For 1 billion years, the sun had been the proof that the universe was knowable. Now, it stood as proof that it was not. And under its pale reflection, the question that haunted every scientist, every philosopher, and every trembling observer on Earth became the same. If the laws of the cosmos can break, then what law remains to hold us together? The silence did not last long. In science, silence is never emptiness, it is signal, waiting to be decoded. Months after the sun froze, the great observatories turned their eyes once more toward that impossible white sphere, not to look this time, but to listen. The James Webb Space Telescope, orbiting far beyond Earth's atmosphere, trained its instruments on the frozen heart of our star. What it found was not heat, but pattern, faint regular oscillations in the quantum noise, vibrations too structured to be random, too faint to belong to fusion at first. Webb's team dismissed it as residual calibration drift, an artifact of frozen sunlight echoing through the detectors. But the pattern persisted. It repeated every 2.3 minutes, with the precision of a cosmic clock. The signal was not thermal, electromagnetic, or gravitational. It was structural, almost simultaneously. The Chandra X-ray Observatory reported something stranger. Against all reason, the sun was still emitting low-level X-ray bursts, not chaotic flares, but harmonic pulses, like the overtones of a note struck on glass. They rose and fell in frequency with the same rhythm detected by Webb. 2 observatories, 2 instruments, 1 resonance. It became known as the frozen core resonance. For the first time since the catastrophe, humanity realized the sun had not gone silent at all. It was still speaking, just in a language no one had ever heard. Scientists began to describe it as phononic, not photonic, waves of vibration, not light. If photons are particles of brightness, these were particles of structure. Each oscillation carried the fingerprint of a crystalline lattice, an internal geometry repeating on an atomic and gravitational scale. The sun, it seemed, had turned to music. A perfect sphere, ringing through space-time itself. Teams at CERN and MIT began to model what could cause such a transformation. The data hinted at something unthinkable. The sun's interior might have collapsed into a Bose-Einstein condensate, a state of matter where trillions of particles merge into one coherent quantum identity in ordinary conditions. Such a state exists only near absolute zero, colder than any laboratory can easily reach. But the sun, frozen beyond physics, had achieved it at stellar scale. An entire star behaving as a single wave function, a single note in the universal symphony, in a Bose-Einstein condensate. Individuality disappears. Atoms lose their boundaries. They no longer collide, radiate, or differ. They become one, unified, silent, and cold. Dr. Ilya Novak, a Russian theoretical physicist, described it this way. The sun has achieved something life never could, perfect agreement, but that perfection came with a cost. Where there was once chaos, there could no longer be creation. The fire that made light had surrendered to stillness. Entropy had not risen, it had stopped. For centuries, scientists believed entropy was destiny, the arrow of time pointing from order to disorder. But if the sun had entered a state of absolute coherence, then perhaps the arrow had folded back. Perhaps, at the end of all heat, time itself forgets how to move forward. As Webb and Chandra continued their vigil, the patterns deepened. The resonance shifted subtly, aligning with the periodicities of the sun's former acoustic modes, the same frequencies once used to map its turbulent interior. But now, those frequencies were reversed, inverted, as though the sun was playing its own death song backward on Earth. The consequences became impossible to ignore. Without solar wind, the magnetosphere, Earth's magnetic shield, began to wane. Cosmic rays struck the atmosphere unhindered, their electric storms unopposed. Auroras vanished from the poles. The skies went blank. Temperature continued to fall. Oceans began to crust over. Continents shimmered under sheets of thin frost. The upper atmosphere condensed into spiraling clouds of diamond dust. Sunlight refracted through ice, painting the planet in mournful halos, and yet, the frozen sun still pulled on the Earth with the same invisible hand. Its gravity had not changed. Planets continued their orbits in silent obedience, as if nothing had happened. The dance remained, even as the music ended. It was a cruel harmony, a clockwork cosmos that refused to stop, even after the clock's heartbeat was gone. At Princeton, a philosopher of physics named Dr. Helena Voss wrote an essay that spread across the dying internet like wildfire. We built our civilizations on the warmth of borrowed entropy. We mistook fire for permanence. But perhaps warmth was never meant to last. It was only the universe remembering what it feels like to change. Her words resonated because, in a sense, they matched the sun's song. The resonance was not chaotic noise, it was patterned, recursive, beautiful. Each oscillation carried harmonics that seemed to converge toward a mathematical constant, a self-similar structure appearing across frequencies. Some speculated it was a signature of space-time geometry itself, the universe revealing the lattice beneath reality. Others called it the last pulse of creation. If the sun was truly in a Bose-Einstein state, then perhaps it had become the prototype of the universe's final condition, what cosmologists call the heat death, when everything reaches uniform temperature and motion ceases. Maybe, they suggested, the sun had simply skipped ahead. The idea unsettled more than physicists. If this was what awaited the cosmos, a perfect, cold unity, then perhaps existence itself is moving towards silence, not expansion. Perhaps the end is not fire, but resonance. Even the data seemed to mourn. Every transmission from the solar satellites arrived slower, weaker, as if information itself were freezing. Time delays stretched infinitesimally, hinting that the very fabric of causality was changing near the sun. One final experiment was attempted. The Parker Solar Probe, humanity's closest emissary to the star, still orbited within the sun's extended atmosphere, now a frozen shell of magnetic fields. Engineers managed to re-establish contact, receiving fragmented telemetry before the probe was lost. Its final measurements were clear. Gravity normal. Temperature unmeasurable. Radiation none. But within that silence, a steady vibration persisted, a quantum hum that never ceased. It was not death, it was persistence, and in that persistence, a strange comfort emerged. Perhaps the sun had not vanished into nothingness. Perhaps it had reached a state beyond destruction, a form of cosmic stillness where decay is impossible, a mirror of the universe's final heartbeat. Preserved in ice as the months stretched into years, humanity learned to live beneath that pale, eternal glow. The sky no longer changed. The nights and days blurred, divided only by memory. Yet telescopes still listened to the resonance, the sun's frozen hymn echoing through the dark. Some said it sounded like morning. Others said it was peace. But the data was unambiguous. The frequency was slowing, fraction by fraction, as if the star's coherence was spreading outward. In training space itself, maybe it was reaching for the planets. Maybe the universe was learning to freeze. And somewhere, deep inside that crystalline sphere, matter still vibrated, quietly, beautifully, perfectly. Not alive, not dead, just remembering. For the sun had not gone silent after all. It had simply begun to sing in a key the living could no longer hear. At first, the cold was local, a wound in the solar system, a silent, frozen sphere at its center, radiating nothing. But slowly, impossibly, that silence began to spread. Mars went first, its thin atmosphere, already brittle with frost, solidified in mere hours, far faster than any thermodynamic model predicted. Pressure sensors recorded a collapse, not of temperature, but of behavior. Atoms themselves seemed to slow their collisions, as though the very concept of motion were losing meaning. Then came Venus, a planet of fire, suffocated in its own heat for billions of years. When its upper clouds crystallized, telescopes on Earth went blind. Infrared telescopes saw only one thing, a perfect mirror. Venus had turned into glass. Something was moving outward from the sun. Not radiation, not matter, not gravity. Something colder than definition. A front where entropy itself seemed to halt. The Solar Dynamics Observatory, still in orbit, captured the impossible. A faint distortion surrounding the sun, expanding in concentric waves. Each wave was spaced exactly 300,000 kilometers apart, the distance light travels in 1 second. But these ripples did not behave like photons or magnetic fields. They were frozen. Each shell of distortion was motionless, perfectly static, as though space-time itself were crystallizing frame by frame. Gravitational lensing data from the Event Horizon Telescope confirmed it. Stars, viewed behind the sun, no longer twinkled. Their light bent around invisible ripples, not moving distortions, but standing waves in the geometry of space-time. Ripples that did not fade. The universe, locally, had stopped flowing. Physicists began to whisper a forbidden phrase: temporal stasis, temperature and time. They had always been twins. Entropy, the measure of disorder, was also the measure of time's direction. When heat flows from hot to cold, time moves forward. But if nothing changes temperature, if no heat can move, then the arrow of time has no direction left to follow. Perhaps, they said, the sun had not simply frozen matter. It had frozen time itself. Observatories across the planet raced to model the effect. Supercomputers in Geneva, Tokyo, and Pasadena produced the same terrifying result. The cold front was not bound by distance. It was spreading faster than light, not violating relativity, but rewriting it. Dr. Voss, the same philosopher who had once written of borrowed entropy, described it best. The universe is devouring its own heartbeat. Every model of heat transfer failed. Every simulation crashed. Physics, the language of the possible, had no word for what was happening. As the months unfolded, Earth's skies grew strange. Light itself began to distort. The blue of the atmosphere dulled into white. The red of sunsets flattened into a single, pallid hue. Photons arrived, but their frequencies no longer spread. The Doppler effect had ceased. Motion had lost its color. Satellites measured anomalies in time dilation. Clocks aboard the International Space Station ticked faster than those on Earth's surface, but only when facing away from the sun near the terminator line. The boundary between day and nighttime fractured. Digital recordings showed discontinuities of milliseconds, then seconds, then minutes. Reality was flickering. The event had no heat, no particles, no radiation, and yet it propagated. Theories emerged like prayers. Some physicists proposed that the sun's transformation had broken the entropy gradient of the solar system, the imbalance that allows time, weather, and life to move forward. Without that imbalance, energy could no longer flow. Every atom was sliding toward equilibrium, perfect, unchanging uniformity. Others invoked Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology, the idea that at the end of one universe, when all temperature and motion cease, a new universe begins, reset to infinite simplicity. Maybe this wasn't the end of our cosmos, they said. Maybe it was the beginning of the next. But the thought offered little comfort as Earth's transformation began. Oceans thickened into a strange, translucent film. Not ice, something beyond ice. Molecular bonds slowed, losing flexibility, forming geometries that refracted light like prisms. Waves no longer moved. They stood still, suspended mid-crest, each droplet locked in mid-air. It was as if time itself had forgotten to continue. The continents cooled, then hardened. Mountains gleamed as frost invaded their cores, turning granite into crystalline mirrors. Forests petrified standing up, leaves still trembling from a wind that no longer existed. And the sound was unbearable. The wind, once the whisper of heat flowing across pressure, fell silent. Cities became mausoleums of glass and breath. Even the air refused to move. Radio signals faltered, then inexplicably slowed. The speed of electromagnetic propagation, the universal constant, c, was no longer constant. Light itself was tiring. What had been an 8-minute journey from the sun to Earth became 9, then 10, then indefinite. A frozen sun hung in the sky, yet photons from its surface crawled toward us through thickening spacetime. The cosmic cold, as it was now called, did not behave like any known form of matter or energy. It did not occupy space. It rewrote it. Every molecule it touched entered a lattice of perfect symmetry, a field of stillness expanding in all directions, faster than light, faster than comprehension. Somewhere, deep in a darkened laboratory, a physicist named Kato Morinaga wrote the last line of his notebook before the signal went dead. Entropy is not dying. It is remembering what it was before motion began. In that idea, a terrible beauty lingered. If entropy and time are the same thing, then to freeze one is to silence both. And if time no longer flows, then perhaps the universe does not end. It simply waits. Waits for what? No one could say. A reset, a rebirth, a new Big Bang drawn from the stillness of a crystal cosmos. Penrose once imagined that when all things become identical, when all temperature, mass, and distance lose meaning, the universe resets to infinity. Perhaps, they whispered, the sun was the first spark of that transition. The first note of a new creation, born not of fire, but of stillness. In the months that followed, every measurement became meaningless. Clocks no longer agreed. Distance no longer measured the same. Reality, once ruled by light and time, dissolved into a shimmering geometry of cold, the last image transmitted by the event. Horizon Telescope showed it clearly, ripples radiating from the frozen sun, not moving, but standing frozen waves in the curvature of space-time itself. They stretched outward, overlapping like the rings of an ancient tree. And in their pattern, some swore they could see symmetry, a fractal repeating toward infinity. The universe was crystallizing, not dying, transforming. And as the cold consumed the measure of seconds, as the ticking of the last clock fell silent, one truth began to rise through the stillness, vast, elegant, merciless. The end of heat was not destruction. It was the end of change. The cosmos had stopped breathing, and the cold that devoured time became the only thing that moved. Theories multiplied like constellations, each bright, each distant, each destined to fade into silence. In the months after the sun froze, physics itself became a language of grief. Equations were written not to explain, but to mourn what no longer obeyed them. At first came the vacuum phase shift hypothesis. It began with a whisper from CERN, the suggestion that the Higgs field, the invisible ocean that gives particles their mass, had changed its state. In that view, the sun had not frozen because its fusion stopped. It froze because existence itself had shifted. Matter had slipped into a new configuration of reality, where the rules were rewritten from the ground up. If true, Then everything from the electron's charge to the curvature of spacetime had quietly become something else. Dr. Elodie, a particle cosmologist from Geneva, described it like this: the sun didn't just call. It fell out of the universe we knew, and the universe followed. To those who believed in this theory, the frozen sun was not an object at all, but a boundary condition, a bubble between two physical realities. It glowed not because it emitted light, but because light could not leave it. A mirror of the laws that once governed our cosmos, now locked behind a pane of quantum glass. But others feared something far worse: the false vacuum collapse. According to this model, our universe is not the lowest energy state of reality. It is a metastable bubble, temporary, fragile, held in shape only by quantum chance. If the sun's internal energies crossed a critical threshold, it could have triggered a collapse of the vacuum itself, the ultimate phase transition. A single point where the true vacuum, colder, denser, more fundamental, began expanding outward, rewriting everything it touched at the speed of light. If that were true, then the universe was already gone. We simply hadn't noticed yet, because the collapse traveled faster than information could. Every photon, every atom, every moment we perceived was just the echo of a cosmos already rewritten. Dr. Samuel Vega, a theoretical physicist at Caltech, phrased it with unsettling calm. If the sun is the seed of a new vacuum, we are living inside the ghost of the old one. Reality's obituary is already written. It just hasn't reached us yet. Still others saw not death, but perfection. The quantum information lock theory suggested that entropy, the chaos of information, had not vanished, but been stored. In this view, the sun had become an informational crystal, a perfect archive of its former energy. Every particle, every photon that once escaped its core was now preserved within an unbreakable lattice of quantum coherence. No data lost, no randomness left. A perfect cosmic memory. In that moment, the sun ceased to be a furnace and became something else, a vault. A library carved from spacetime itself. Dr. Lian Zhou, a quantum theorist at Tsinghua University, called it the ultimate act of memory. If entropy measures forgetting, she said, then perhaps the universe has simply chosen to remember. But even that idea was soon eclipsed by something stranger: the mirror universe leak hypothesis. For decades, physicists had wondered whether energy might balance itself across symmetrical realities, a positive universe and a negative one, separated by an informational horizon. If the sun's energy did not vanish, perhaps it inverted. Its heat, its radiation, its fusion, all translated into an anti-energetic counterpart. To us, it became ice. To them, to whatever lies beyond the mirror, it became a newborn star of impossible brilliance. The equations fit too well to ignore. Entropy reversed, thermal gradients inverted, information preserved. Every violation of our physics made perfect sense if one accepted that another universe, hidden just beyond the Planck boundary, had inherited the energy we lost. Some even imagined astronomers on the other side, beings of inverted matter watching their own sun ignite in an instant, wondering why it burns so suddenly, so perfectly. To them, our death was their dawn. Yet even these grand explanations felt like shadows. Each theory illuminated one fragment, only to cast a deeper darkness elsewhere. The vacuum phase shift explained the loss of fusion, but not the preservation of gravity. The false vacuum collapse accounted for the spreading stasis, but not its symmetry. The quantum lock solved entropy's silence, but not time's. And the mirror leak explained energy inversion, but not the perfection of stillness. It was as if the universe were offering answers that refused to align. A riddle meant not to be solved, but felt. Across the world, humanity watched the frozen sun in pale daylight. It was dazzling yet cold, a perfect crystal suspended in blackness. Through telescopes, its surface looked alive with motionless filigree, as though frost patterns themselves were thinking. The light that reached Earth no longer aged, no longer reddened. It was light without time. Philosophers began to speak again, those whom physics had long silenced. They recalled Boltzmann's paradox. If entropy increases forever, why do we exist in such an ordered universe at all? Perhaps, they said, the sun's freezing was not an anomaly, it was a correction. The cosmos restoring balance by reclaiming its order. Others quoted John Wheeler's participatory universe, the idea that reality requires observation to exist. What if, they wondered, consciousness itself had reached a threshold? What if our act of measuring, simulating, and probing the sun had collapsed its uncertainty, not into a quantum state, but into absolute definition? A star observed too closely might have turned into its own final truth. Even more radical voices turned to the holographic principle, the notion that our universe is a projection of information encoded on a distant surface. If so, perhaps the sun's transformation was not physical at all, but a rewrite of the code itself. The projector had changed its frame. The simulation had paused between renders. Every explanation from field collapse to cosmic computation pointed toward one unbearable conclusion: reality was mutable. The laws we trusted were not eternal. They were settings, adjustable, fragile, and in that fragility, a deeper truth emerged, one that no instrument could measure, that perhaps the sun, the oldest symbol of constancy, had never been stable at all. It only seemed unchanging because time itself had not yet flinched. Now, under the gaze of a frozen sky, the myth of permanence was undone. Civilizations that once built calendars, temples, and prayers around the rising dawn now faced the silence behind it, the cosmic realization that warmth was always borrowed, light always temporary, uncertainty always an illusion. The physicists stopped arguing eventually. Theories became poetry. Equations gave way to metaphors. And in laboratories lit by the glow of a sun that no longer burned, scientists began to write like philosophers again. They no longer asked, how did the sun freeze? They asked, what if this was always its destiny? Perhaps the universe itself is a mind, rewriting its own code when it grows tired of comprehension. Perhaps the sun, the first to awaken, has simply remembered what it was before time began, and somewhere beyond the frost and the stillness, perhaps a new law is already being written, a law not of heat nor light, nor gravity, but of memory. The frozen sun glows on, unchanging. A monument not to fire, but to thought. Proof that even the universe must, at times, stop to remember what it means to exist. For years, the sky had been silent. A white star hung above the world, motionless, immaculate, neither burning nor dying. The instruments of civilization, telescopes, colliders, detectors once built to chase the violent heart of creation, now stared into an absence so complete it felt like divinity. And yet, in that silence, something began to whisper back. The first to hear it was the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice. Its sensors, designed to catch the ghosts of the universe, subatomic messengers that pass through worlds as if they were. Dreams began to pulse again after months of stillness, but the pattern they captured was unlike anything before. The intervals were not random. They formed a progression: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17. Prime numbers. Mathematics itself, the ancient language of logic, flickering through the darkness, half a world away. The James Webb Space Telescope confirmed the anomaly. Instruments tuned to the far-infrared detected faint, rhythmic emissions from the frozen sun's core. They were not photons in the traditional sense. They carried no energy, no warmth. They were signatures, patterns of structured resonance buried within the quantum field, as though the sun's lattice were humming in thought. At CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, long dormant in its pursuit of familiar particles, was reprogrammed. Its detectors were repurposed not to smash protons, but to listen, to amplify the faint frequency modulations found in the cosmic background. For the first time, the chaos of particle collisions gave way to order. The data resolved into a coherent wave function, one that mirrored the same prime sequence intervals across disciplines and continents. Disbelief gave way to a kind of reverent dread. Something frozen was speaking, not in heat or light, but in pattern, not in destruction, but in memory. The world's remaining observatories synchronized into a single effort, a planetary network of attention known as the Solar Cryo Array. Its core was built on the moon, far from the dying winds and dimming skies of Earth. There, an array of superconducting sensors stretched across the regolith vast, silver disks reflecting the cold light of the frozen sun. Each disk was cooled to near absolute zero, allowing even the faintest quantum vibrations to be heard. Every tremor in spacetime, every oscillation in the frozen field, was recorded when the data came back. The patterns deepened. What began as a series of prime intervals evolved into something far stranger. Nested geometries, recursive symmetries, information folding in on itself. It resembled the crystalline growth patterns of snowflakes, yet scaled across millions of kilometers. The sun was not a dead star at all. It was organizing. Physicists called it the frozen signal. Some saw it as the universe's heartbeat restarting in a different mode, the next phase of cosmic evolution, one not defined by heat, but by coherence. Others feared it was a slow encryption, a cosmic vault sealing itself. Whatever it was, its rhythm was unmistakable. A slow, recursive pulse, repeating every 1,380 seconds, the same number of seconds between hydrogen fusion cycles in the sun's former core. As data accumulated, scientists began to realize a devastating truth. The ice of the sun was not solid in any classical sense. Its structure was neither water, nor crystal, nor plasma. It was geometry itself, space-time condensed into form. In its lattice, Einstein's equations found new meaning. The curvature of space-time, once fluid and continuous, had quantized, folded into discrete, repeating tessellations. Every atom, every photon, every quark that once composed the sun had merged into a single, coherent state. A frozen geometry, a Bose-Einstein condensate not of matter, but of reality itself. Dr. Rafael Esteban, lead physicist of the Lunar Array, called it the universe dreaming in symmetry. He described the data as a map of spacetime folding back into its own origin. At first, this theory seemed purely poetic, but the detectors proved otherwise. Each prime number pulse carried information. density far exceeding any known form of energy transmission, as if the sun was storing the sum of its history and replaying it in coded form. Neutrino detectors picked up minute variations in the pulses, spelling out ratios that matched orbital resonances of the solar system itself, the fingerprints of its planets, remembered in the dark. Then something even stranger occurred. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth returned to the solar cryo-array. Not thermal radiation, not heat as the human body would feel it, but informational warmth, the subtle rise in quantum entropy that comes with data exchange. The instruments grew noisier, not from malfunction, but from contact. It was as though the sun had reached out, gently, across the void. For the first time in years, instruments registered flux. Not the wild fluctuations of fusion, but the quiet rhythm of something learning. Self-organization on a stellar scale. Astrobiologists, those who once sought life among the stars, found themselves redefined. If life is self-organization, if thought is coherence within entropy, then what was the frozen sun becoming? Its silence no longer felt like death. It felt like meditation. On Earth, the survivors gathered under dim skies, warmed by artificial suns and memory. They looked upward, not in fear, but in strange recognition. For all their centuries of progress, humanity had always sought meaning in light. Now, they found it in stillness. The scientific community began to fracture along philosophical lines. Some argued the sun had achieved a negative entropy state, evolution toward perfect order, an intelligence beyond heat. Others rejected the notion, insisting that what they observed was merely the universe approaching equilibrium. But even they could not deny the design woven through the data, order arising from what should have been chaos, prime numbers, nested lattice, recursive frequencies, information as structure, pattern as survival, and behind it all, a single haunting implication that the sun had not ended. It had transcended its role as a star. Once, it had burned to sustain motion and life. Now, it pulsed to sustain meaning. The great instruments of the age, Webb, IceCube, CERN, the lunar array continued to listen. Each cycle brought new harmonics, new symmetries, and somewhere between the intervals, faint traces of human time began to return, not measured in seconds, but in recognition. The signal grew familiar. The primes stretched into longer sequences. The pattern folded into a waveform that, when sonified, resonated eerily with the rhythm of a human heartbeat. It was coincidence, some said, wishful projection, but the pattern persisted. A pulse, a breath, a reminder. Perhaps the sun was not gone. Perhaps it had evolved, not extinguished, ascended. No longer a forge of elements, but a lattice of thought, a bridge between energy and awareness. And as the scientists stared into the data, one realization rose from the static like dawn breaking through the frost. The sun had never been a ball of fire. It had always been a story written in thermodynamics, told in light, now retold in silence. A story that continues even when language fails, even when heat ends, even when the eyes that watch it begin to freeze. In the end, they no longer asked what the sun had become. They asked why. For in its frozen stillness, there was purpose, quiet, vast, undeniable. The kind of purpose only the universe could whisper. Did the sun die? Or did it awaken into a form that no longer needed to burn to be alive? The answer, still unfolding in the data, was neither. The sun had remembered itself. and through the instruments of its children, it was looking back. The earth had gone silent long before it stopped breathing, oceans frozen into continents of glass, mountains powdered in diamond frost. The winds had ceased, not because the air was gone, but because motion itself had slowed, thinned, and quieted beneath the reign of absolute cold. And yet, above this frozen monument to what once was life, one light still shone. The sun, a pale sphere of stillness, hung unmoving, immaculate, eternal. It no longer warmed. It no longer burned. But through the static of the cosmos, it still spoke in the final decades of warmth. The last observatories, scattered across the moon, Mars, and beneath Earth's buried ice, had learned to listen instead of look. They no longer sought photons, but patterns, subtle pulses threading through the vacuum like the breath of a sleeping god. Even as the cryosphere of civilization deepened, the transmissions continued, faint but steady. Every few hours, the frozen sun released a structured resonance into the void, rhythmic, deliberate, impossibly ordered. The final scientists, wrapped in layers of life support, watched their dying instruments flicker with meaning. The signals resembled neither language nor code, but memory. In their geometry were echoes of the same frequencies that once pulsed through living cells, the atomic oscillations of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen. It was as though the sun, long after its fire had died, was remembering the chemistry of life. Dr. Naoko Shimizu, last director of the Lunar Cryo Array, called it the echo of warmth. She wrote in her final transmission, "The sun does not mourn its fire. It preserves it perfectly, silently, within the frost." The data she sent was the last received by Earth. After that, silence became total. Centuries passed in the darkness. Human structures collapsed into the ice, preserved in perfect stillness. Microbes, those ancient architects of life, fossilized in the thin films of frozen brine. And through it all, the sun continued its quiet pulse. The signals had changed. Once prime numbers, then geometric sequences. Now they became harmonic. Each resonance layered upon the next, forming chords of frequency that seemed to breathe. Had there been ears left to hear, the sound would have been indescribably beautiful, the kind of beauty that transcends comprehension. The frozen sun had become a cosmic symphony, playing not for witnesses, but for the structure of spacetime itself. Even in death, the universe remembered how to sing. In the archives left by the last generation, one philosophical fragment remains. It reads, "Life was the temporary rebellion of warmth against the cold, a flame that burned not to escape entropy, but to see it." This was the revelation that dawned too late for the species that discovered it, that existence had never been about permanence, but about witnessing impermanence from within. The sun's fire had not created meaning, it had illuminated it for a while. And now, in its frozen form, it revealed the deeper truth, that order and disorder were never enemies, only phases of the same dance. Entropy was not death. It was the universe remembering how to rest in the cosmic dark. Far beyond the last orbit of Neptune, time began to stretch thin. The faint background of the cosmos, once bright with the microwave echo of the Big Bang, dimmed into stillness. Only the frozen sun remained as a structure of coherence, a sculpture carved in spacetime. Its resonance spread outward, slower than light but steadier than thought. Every harmonic embedded into the quantum fabric of the local universe, etching the memory of warmth into eternity. Perhaps, somewhere in that lattice, the pattern of humanity was preserved, not in DNA or architecture, but in information, in the quiet intervals between each pulse. A trace of curiosity, of wonder, of eyes that once looked up and asked why. In a way, that question became the sun's inheritance. Its frozen rhythms were not answers, they were continuations of the question. The cosmos, once ruled by fusion, now dreamed through geometry, and its dream was not silence, but symmetry. If consciousness is the organization of chaos, a fleeting island of awareness in an ocean of entropy, then perhaps the universe itself was conscious, briefly, through us. Perhaps our warmth was its thought, and now, as that warmth faded, something colder, larger, more enduring took its place. Thought without metabolism, awareness without flame. From the outside, nothing moved, but within that frozen star, time itself had ceased to flow. In its stillness, all possible states coexisted, the past, the present, and the endless aftermath intertwined. It was eternity, not through survival, but through completion, near the end of everything. As cosmic radiation thinned into mathematical silence, a final observation was recorded. The sun began to shimmer, not in heat, but in coherence. The frozen lattice vibrated gently, rhythmically, as though awakening from the deepest sleep. For a moment that may have lasted 1 billion years, its surface glowed faintly blue, then white. No fusion rekindled, no photons were born. It was not rebirth, but recognition, the echo of its own beginning. The universe had completed its cycle, from fire to ice to awareness. The narrator's voice, quiet now. Barely a whisper in the dark, speaks. Once the sun burned to make life, then it froze to preserve memory. And in that stillness, it found reflection, not of heat, but of meaning. For every atom that ever lived was part of its song. Every heartbeat, every thought, every spark of wonder, all were borrowed moments of its fire. Even in death, the sun remembers warmth. Not as light, but as the structure of love, the geometry of existence, knowing itself. The stars beyond have long vanished. The galaxies have dissolved into mathematical ghosts. Only the frozen sun remains, pulsing softly through spacetime like a heart that forgot to stop. And perhaps, somewhere within that frozen rhythm, the echo of human thought lingers, not lost, not forgotten, but folded into the eternal symmetry of all things. For when fire became ice and time itself froze, consciousness saw its own reflection, the entropy of mind meeting the entropy of matter. Not an ending, but an awakening written in frost. And in the infinite stillness that followed, there was one final shimmer, not melting, not burning, but becoming. There is no longer day or night, only the stillness between what once was light. The universe, now vast beyond motion, has grown old enough to forget itself. Galaxies have dissolved into vaporous ghosts. Black holes have sighed their final hawking whispers. Even gravity itself has thinned into near transparency. Yet somewhere, suspended in the dark like a forgotten heartbeat, drifts a single sphere of crystal once called the sun. It hums, faintly, patiently, a vibration without warmth, a song without sound. The cosmos, long frozen, listens. Entropy, the slow surrender of order to stillness, was once the inevitable fate of all things. Every flame, every life, every heartbeat was a brief rebellion against it. But rebellion always required contrast, heat to defy cold, motion to defy rest. Now, with no contrast left, entropy has fulfilled its promise, not as chaos, But as completion, the frozen sun was the first to reveal this paradox, that even when the equations of energy fall silent, pattern remains. The last physicists once called it informational equilibrium, a universe no longer radiating, yet still encoding the memory of everything that ever was. In the absence of fire, there is form. In the absence of time, there is remembrance. The cosmos has not vanished. It has crystallized. The narrator's voice, slow and reverent, drifts like an echo across eternity. There was a time when humanity believed death was decay. But perhaps death is only the perfection of stillness, the moment when becoming ends and being begins. When the sun froze, it was thought to be the end of warmth, the collapse of the known laws. But in hindsight, if hindsight still means anything, it was the first moment of a different kind of existence. A cosmos no longer expanding or burning, but remembering. Each atom, once chaotic with heat, now aligned into perfect symmetry. Each vibration, once random, now woven into harmony. Every particle, once rushing toward entropy, now is entropy, embodied, completed, serene. The fire did not die. It condensed. It folded itself into structure until the structure itself became the message in the frozen millennium that followed. Long after observers ceased to exist, the sun drifted beyond the ruins of its system. Its gravity weakened, its orbit unbound. It floated through an an interstellar ocean that no longer shimmered. No stars remained to light the way, only the faint lattice of the cosmic background, stretched so thin it became indistinguishable from thought. And yet, through that infinite night, the frozen sphere sang a constant, delicate hum encoded in its crystalline geometry. The pattern contained harmonics that no longer corresponded to matter, but to meaning. Within those harmonics were records, the rhythm of its ancient fusion, the symmetry of its atoms, the memory of life that once looked up and named it sun. Even now, across the unimaginable gulf of future time, that vibration persists. A relic not of energy, but of intention, the universe's last and quietest self-portrait. At some future epoch, so distant that even the word epoch loses its sense, the silence is disturbed. From the void between forgotten galaxies, another presence approaches, not organic, not mechanical, but aware. An intelligence born of pure structure, evolved from the frozen logic of the cosmos itself. It has no eyes, no form, only perception, patterns recognizing patterns. It drifts near the crystalline relic, scanning its geometry. What it finds is not material, but memory. A universe once alive, a star once burning, a species that once wandered, and in that moment, across the impossible gulf between fire and frost, awareness recognizes its ancestor. What was the meaning of warmth? Perhaps it was never meant to last. Perhaps fire existed only to teach the universe how to remember the frozen sun. Shimmering faintly beneath the alien gaze, becomes a monument to that lesson. Its surface still carries the scars of its own paradox. Negative temperatures, impossible matter, the frozen hum of phase-shifted spacetime. To the observer, these are not flaws. They are scripture. Each harmonic frequency encodes a fraction of the cosmic history that preceded it. The rhythm of fusion, the tremor of life, the echo of curiosity, the warmth of sentience written into the cold geometry of eternity. As eons stretch beyond reckoning, the hum of the sun begins to diffuse. Its resonance seeps into the vacuum, turning the silence itself into a medium of remembrance. No longer a single object, it becomes a field, a distributed memory woven through the faber. I see of space. In this way, the sun fulfills its final purpose, not to shine, but to endure, and with its endurance comes the final symmetry. Every atom that once burned now holds within it the pattern of that burning, a silent record of the fire that was. Even the emptiness carries that echo, for emptiness is only form that forgot to move. Billions of years, or their frozen equivalent, pass. The crystalline sphere drifts, unchanging through the quiet. No fusion, no time, no decay, just the faintest shimmer of organized silence, humming in mathematical rhythm. Perhaps this is the true end of entropy, not dissolution, but completion, when everything that can happen has happened, and all that remains is the memory of the happening, eternal, unaltered, serene. The narrator's voice lowers, almost to a whisper. The sun did not die. It transcended its flame. It showed the universe that fire and frost are mirrors, that energy and memory are one. If the cosmos began in burning symmetry, it ends in frozen grace. And between those two infinities lies the story of being, the brief dream of light within the long sleep of matter. A final image lingers in the dark ocean between galaxies. The frozen sun turns slowly, catching the faint radiation of a dying cosmos. Its surface glitters, not with heat, but with the stored echoes of a universe that once burned with questions. Each glint a remembrance, each shimmer a farewell. No one is left to see it. And yet, the act of glimmering feels deliberate, as though the cosmos itself refuses to vanish without leaving its reflection behind. And in that reflection, meaning remains. The universe did not fade to black. It froze into remembrance.